He almost didn't stop at the medical waste bay. That was the thing he came back to in the weeks afterward, the way the almost had been real, the way the decision had not been a decision so much as an interruption of one. He had been moving through the third cargo zone at the pace of a man 3 days into a solo contract, cataloging salvageable container stock, and the medical waste bay had been on his route only because the routing algorithm put it there. He was thinking about the alloy reclaim in Zone 4. He was thinking about whether the protein synthesizer on his ship had the same calibration issue it had had last month. He was thinking about none of the things that would have told him in advance that the day was going to be the kind that reorganized everything after it. The pod's biosensor registered his proximity on the passive scan cycle. His suit ran automatically, and the suit flagged it the way it flagged all biological readings. A soft amber light in the left corner of his visor, significant spending, waiting for him to look at it. He looked at it. The reading was faint, not the faint of something that had been alive and wasn't. He had salvaged enough stations to know what dead biological material looked like on a scan, and it had a specific signature that was absent here. This was the faint of something with a heartbeat that was doing the work of a much larger heartbeat, with not enough reserve left to do it. His suit's medical function put the reading in the lower threshold of vital sign detection and flagged it with a second amber light. Biological entity, status, critical. He stood in the medical waste bay of a derelict station and looked at the amber lights for a moment. Then he looked at the pod. It was sealed, disposal tagged, stacked in the third row with 14 others whose biosensors were reading nothing, because the 14 others contained what disposal tags were supposed to contain. This one contained something his suit had just told him was alive. He pulled the pod out of the stack and read the tag. The Solvari classification system was not in his translator's primary database. He had worked Solvari-adjacent salvage routes for 2 years and had the functional vocabulary of a contractor who needed to read manifests and nothing more. The disposal category code he was looking at was not in the functional vocabulary. He ran it through the full translation function, which was slower and less reliable, and watched it produce options while the pod's biosensor continued its faint, determined amber in the corner of his visor. Genetic reject, culling classification, disposal status, scheduled incineration. He read it twice. He read it the way he read things he wanted to understand better before he decided whether the reading had been accurate. Then he looked at the pod, which contained a person. That was what the amber light meant. That was what biological entity, status, critical meant, and the classification on the tag was a bureaucratic override of that fact that he did not have a mechanism to accept. He had no framework that contained let the person in the pod die because someone else's paperwork said to. He understood in the abstract that such frameworks existed. He had encountered in the abstract the fact of Solvari eugenic culling. In the way you encountered facts about practices, you found repellent without expecting to be standing inside the material reality of one. He was standing inside it now. The override took 11 seconds. He had salvage authorization on the station's active systems under his contract, which gave him access to the disposal protocol controls, and the backup power cell running the incinerator schedule recognized his credentials without argument because credentials were credentials, and the power cell did not have an opinion about what he used them for. He broke the seal. He transferred the pod to his cargo lift. He got it back to his ship with the focused efficiency of a man who had determined the next several actions and was executing them in order. And it was only when the pod was in his medical bay and he was setting up the revival sequence that the other part of his brain, the part that was not in execution mode, caught up with what had happened and said, with the slightly stunned quality of a conscious mind encountering a fait accompli. "We're doing this then." Yes, he told it. "We're doing this." The revival sequence flagged 17 incompatibility warnings in the first 4 minutes. He worked through them in order. The medical bay on his ship had been certified for emergency human care. adequate for the kind of solo salvage operator who worked alone in low-traffic corridors and needed something between nothing and a proper medical facility. It had a revival pod that was not the pod she had arrived in, a pharmaceutical dispensary calibrated for human physiology, a diagnostic system that understood human vital signs completely and Solvari vital signs approximately, and a database that he began, in the first 72 hours, to treat as a document containing more uncertainty flags than information. He worked around the flags. He had been working around inadequate equipment for most of his career, and the principle was consistent. You understood what the equipment was trying to do, and you found another way to do it when the equipment couldn't, and you stayed awake as long as staying awake was the thing that made the difference. He stayed awake through the first crisis on the second day, and the second crisis on the seventh, and the third, which was the worst, on the 14th, when the vital sign display did things he had no diagnostic vocabulary for, and he made decisions based on underlying principles and the specific stubbornness of a man who had already come this far. He talked while he worked. This was not something he had planned. He was not, by nature or habit, a man who narrated his actions aloud, but the silence of the medical bay in crisis was its own kind of pressure, and the talking pushed back against it. He explained what he was doing and why, to the unconscious person who could not hear him, in the flat and functional language of someone who needed to say the steps aloud to confirm he had them right. It was not a conversation. It was a man refusing to let the work happen in silence because silence felt, in the medical bay at 2 in the morning on the 14th day, too much like acceptance. She stabilized on the 19th day. He did not celebrate this. He noted it in the ship's log with the same format he used for all log entries, ate something he had not eaten since morning, and sat in the medical bay for 20 minutes doing nothing, which was the closest thing to celebration his capacity allowed at that point. She came back to awareness on the 23rd day, in fragments, the specific, disorienting emergence of a consciousness returning from a long way down. He had read enough about Solvari recovery patterns in the database's insufficient literature to expect disorientation, and he had prepared for it with the practical thoroughness of a person who has been preparing for things for 3 weeks and has developed the habit. He was in the bay when it happened. He stayed in the chair in the corner and did not approach her, because the thing she needed first was the ability to orient without pressure, and the thing he needed to not do was become, in her first moments of awareness, another source of uncertainty in a situation that was made of nothing else. She took stock of the room. Then she took stock of him. "Where is this?" she said, in Solvari, which his suit's translator converted to standard with the accuracy of a system that had been processing her language for 3 weeks and had gotten better at it. "My ship," he said. "We're in the Verath Drift corridor, about 6 days out from the station where I found you." She processed this. "You found me," she said. "In the cargo bay, yes." "The disposal bay," she said. "Yes." She was quiet for a moment. Her vital signs on the display above her were reading in the range he had learned to consider stable, not fully recovered, not out of risk, but stable in the specific way of a body that had made a decision to continue and was acting on it. "Why?" she said. He had known the question was coming. He had not been able to construct an answer that fit in a sentence in 23 days of having the time to try. "I read the biosensor reading and then I read the disposal tag," he said, "and the two things didn't belong in the same sentence together. So I did the thing that made them not be in the same sentence together." She looked at him from across the medical bay with the unfocused focus of someone whose processing was returning before their strength was, and did not respond to this immediately, which was the first indication he had that she was someone who took the time she needed with things rather than filling silence for its own sake. "You're not Solvari," she said eventually. "Human," he said. "Corin Vask, salvage operator." "SAE," she said. "Not my name is just the name, placed in the space between them with the economy of someone who was rationing effort and choosing what to spend it on. You kept me alive." "Yes," he said. Why? She said again, and this time it was clearly not the same question as the first time. The first why had been about the retrieval, the procedural fact of it, and this one was about the weeks after, the choices that had been made in a medical bay on a stranger's ship for a stranger's life. He thought about it honestly. Because you were alive, he said, and I was in a position to keep you that way. That's the whole thing. I don't have a more constructed answer than that. She looked at him for a long moment in the medical bay's low light, with the amber glow of her stable vital sign display above her, and the sound of the ship's drive at cruise behind the wall. Then she looked at the ceiling, which was the look of someone deciding whether to say something, and then back at him. The Solvari who put me there would say I should not have survived, she said, that the disposal classification was correct. I know, he said. I read the classification. And I don't carry a framework that lets me agree with it, he said. I don't have a category for let the person in the pod die because a system designated them disposable. I've tried to locate the category and it's not there. She looked at him with an expression his translator did not offer a rendering for, not because the translation was failing, but because expressions that had no simple name were outside the function's scope. That's a human quality, she said, not a judgment, an observation precise and considered. I've read about it. Have you? He said. Your species resists categorization systems that reduce persons, she said. It's in the literature. My civilization finds it philosophically inconsistent. Your civilization left you in a garbage bay to die, he said, without heat, because it was a fact and he had been a fact-based person for a long time. I'm comfortable with the inconsistency. Something happened in her expression, brief, specific, and not fully managed. She looked back at the ceiling. Her vital signs held steady. Outside the medical bay window, the Varath drift corridor did what drift corridors did, carried them forward indifferently through the dark. I'm tired, she said. I know, he said. Sleep. The vitals are good, I'll be here. She slept. He stayed in the chair, which he had been doing for 23 days, and the ship carried them both forward in the specific quiet of a space that had become, without ceremony or intention, the place where something was being kept alive. Recovery, he discovered, was not a line. It was a territory, expansive in some directions and suddenly bordered in others, with weather patterns that could not be predicted from the topography. She had days that were straightforward and days that were not, and the days that were not had their own specific textures. The weariness that was not physical, the silences that were not comfortable, the occasional sharp precision of someone who had survived something and was not yet sure what they were supposed to do with the survival. He learned her patterns the way he learned salvage sites, by moving through them carefully and noting where the weight was distributed and where the floor was uncertain. He did not push. He was not, by temperament, a person who pushed. He was a person who showed up consistently and let the situation develop at the speed it was going to develop, which was a quality that had served him in long contracts on difficult sites and was serving him now in ways he had not anticipated applying it. She started to ask questions in the third week of her recovery. Not personal questions, operational ones. The questions of a person who was reassembling a relationship with the practical world and was doing it from the outside in. How did the drive system work? What was the salvage licensing structure? Where they were going? How long? She listened to his answers with the focused attention of someone who was building a picture and checking it against the one she had, and she asked follow-up questions when the picture had gaps, which it frequently did. He answered all of them. You do this alone, she said one evening, statement rather than question. Solo salvage, yes, he said. Most smaller operators work solo. The margins on crew share contracts in this corridor are thin. You were alone on the station. Yes. When you found me. Yes. She processed this. If you had not been there, she said, if it had been someone else. I don't know, he said, because he didn't. Different people, different calls. She was quiet for a moment with the quality of someone doing arithmetic that has an uncomfortable result. You personally, she said, not the circumstance. You made the choice. Yes, he said. I want to understand that, she said. The choice. Not philosophically. I've read the literature on human moral reflex. I want to understand it in this specific case. You read the disposal tag. You understood what it meant. Yes. And you overrode it. Yes. Why? She said. And it was the third version of the question. Not the retrieval and not the weeks after, but the root. The specific root of a specific decision made by a specific man in a cargo bay. And she was asking it in the way of someone who needed the answer not for academic purposes, but because her life was the thing the answer had produced, and the weight of that made the question essential. He thought about it in the honest way, not the way that produced a clean answer but the way that produced a true one. The tag said genetic reject, he said, and the biosensor said heartbeat. And I have spent my whole life learning to read what things actually are underneath the categories they've been put in. Because categories are applied by people with interests, and what a thing is doesn't always survive that translation. You were alive. The tag said you were garbage. The tag was wrong. I act on what things are, not on what someone decided to file them under. She looked at him across the common area table. She had been sitting across from him, with the careful distance of someone who had not yet developed a vocabulary for the space between them, and was defaulting to the spatial version of formal. Her secondary circulatory markings, the bioluminescent lines along her jaw and collarbones that he had learned, were a Solvari physiological tell, expressing internal state in ways she could not fully control. Were running the slow amber that his 3 weeks of observation had filed under processing something significant. That's the most honest answer I've been given to any question in a long time, she said. It's the only kind I'm good at, he said. She was quiet for a moment. I don't know what I am to you, she said. In your framework, your categories. I have tried to locate the applicable term, and I cannot find one that fits. I know, he said. I've tried the same thing. Not your patient, she said. You're not qualified, not your responsibility, you chose it. Not a salvage find, he said. Not a passenger, not a friend, she said. The differential is too large. Yes, he said. Not any of the categories that would apply if the circumstances had been ordinary, she said. Because the circumstances were not ordinary. No, he said, they weren't. She looked at the table for a moment and then back at him. I owe you existence, she said. My civilization has a framework for that. It is a framework of debt, absolute, permanent, non-negotiable. You hold my life. I owe everything forward from the moment you intervened. I know that framework exists, he said carefully. I don't hold it. I didn't keep you alive to hold it. I know you didn't, she said. That's not how human moral reflex works. You keep you alive because the biosensor read amber and the tag was wrong. She looked at him steadily. But what I carry is separate from what you hold. I carry it regardless of whether you hold it. That is what I am trying to tell you. He was quiet for a moment with the weight of that. Okay, he said, I hear that. It means, she said, that every interaction between us is going to be complicated in ways that ordinary 2 days out from port, she found him doing maintenance on the drive calibration, one of the weekly tasks that solo salvage required, and that he performed with the same methodical attention he brought to all ship maintenance, which was the attention of someone who understood that the line between a functioning ship and a non-functioning ship was built from the accumulation of small things done correctly. He was under the panel in the drive corridor. She sat down on the floor near the panel opening, which was, he registered this without comment, the first time she had voluntarily positioned herself at a level below standing since she had been well enough to stand. Port in 2 days, she said. Yes, he said, from under the panel. And then, she said, he came out from under the panel and sat up. She was looking at the corridor wall with the careful quality of someone who had decided to say something before they arrived somewhere that made not saying it permanent. I haven't asked what you're going to do, he said. I know, she said. You've been not tasking for 2 weeks. It seemed like something you needed to come to in your own sequence, he said. She looked at him. The port is not somewhere I have a connection, she said. I have no connection anywhere. My family filed the disposal classification. My community validated it. The genetic certification board processed it. She said these facts with the flatness of someone who has moved the information from the register, where it causes acute pain, to the register, where it causes a different kind of pain, which is not the same as healing but is a form of continuing. I have nowhere that is mine to go. Okay, he said. You're not going to offer, she said. I'm waiting to understand what you want, he said. Offering before I understand that treats the offer as the important thing. She was quiet. The drive corridor hummed around them with the consistent frequency of a functioning ship going the right direction. My species practices a value system that told me my life had no worth, she said. And I survived, which is, I have not yet determined what I'm supposed to do with survival in that context. But I know that what I don't want is to be somewhere, because someone else determined where I should be. Understood, he said. I want to choose, she said. Wherever I go, I want it to be chosen. Yes, he said. The ship goes forward from the port, she said. It has a route, you have contracts. Next contract is in the Verath outer belt, he said. 6 weeks of work, then the Solon corridor. I could learn the work, she said. It was not a request. It was the statement of someone determining whether a variable was viable before they incorporated it into a plan. I'm not a salvage operator, but I'm not nothing. I have technical training, biological science background, classification system expertise. I could be useful. You could, he said. I'm not asking because I owe you, she said. I want to say that with precision. I'm asking because it is a direction I would choose, and because, she paused. The amber in her markings ran slow and specific. Because the ship going forward is going somewhere, and I am trying to go somewhere, and those two things currently point in the same direction. He looked at her for a moment. He thought about the cargo bay. He thought about 23 days and 3 crises, and the vital sign display, and the conversations that had been direct because they had to be, and had stayed direct because it turned out that was what both of them were. He thought about a word in an old language that meant the one whose existence changed the shape of what followed and ran in both directions from the encounter. Yeah, he said. Okay. She looked at him. That's it, that's the answer. I was going to say yes, but yeah seemed more accurate to how I actually feel about it, he said. Something moved in her expression, slow and specific, and entirely its own thing. Something he did not have a reference for, and was not going to pretend to, because the relationship they had been built on not pretending, and he was not about to start now. Very well, she said, and there was something in the precise formality of very well that contained, underneath it, the register of someone who was using formality to hold something they did not yet have a shape for, which was, he understood, accurate. They sat in the drive corridor for a while. The ship carried them toward port and then past port in the accounting that would happen, into the next contract and the next corridor, and the shape of days that neither of them had mapped. There was no blueprint. They had tried the standard categories and the categories hadn't fit, and what was left when categories didn't fit was the specific thing itself, without the name, without the framework, held only by the two people inside it who knew what it was because they had been there for all of it. He had found her among discarded things. She had been alive underneath the tag. He had read what things actually were and acted accordingly, and everything after had been built on that foundation in the dark and the crisis and the slow return of a person to themselves. Impossible to define. He had tried. He had the ship's log to prove he had tried. The person I found was the closest he had gotten, and it was not a category, and it was completely accurate, and it ran, as the old Silvari word had, in both directions from the encounter. The drive hummed, the corridor held them, the ship went forward.